Speaker. It's a pleasure, as always, to follow the Honourable Member for Clwyd South, and I'd like to join him as well as the Honourable Member for Cynon Valley in thanking the staff of the Welsh Affairs Select Committee. There are a number of committee members here present this afternoon, and we do really benefit from their hard work and diligence in preparing what I would argue is a very impressive range of inquiries at the moment. I think we punch above our weight, very much like Wales perhaps. And can I start my remarks proper by congratulating and thanking my right honourable friend from Surrey, Pembrokeshire, for securing this debate and for also leading the Welsh Affairs Select Committee in the way that he's done so. Like the right honourable member for Surrey, Pembrokeshire, and my right honourable friend for Carmarthen East and Ever, and indeed the honourable member for my right honourable friend from Aberconwy, something that this debate has already caused us to discuss are the structural long-term problems that Wales and Wales's economy is facing, and indeed the demographic consequences of those structural problems. Mention has already been made this afternoon of the recent census results, and in which Ceredigion reported a fall in its population of 5.8%. Now, I don't intend to pursue this line of inquiry in my own remarks this afternoon, but I do think it does an important area for us to consider in the future and to debate, because it is intertwined with all this debate about levelling up and building a more prosperous economy and indeed society, because what we are seeing, I fear, in many rural areas, but particularly in areas like Ceredigion, a demographic trap, if you like, in which one of our biggest and most valuable exports are young people and skills. And it's something that has been happening, yes, for many years, but it is a trend that is sadly accelerating in more recent decades, and it's something that we do need to get a handle on. But for my remarks this afternoon, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to just focus on the impact the recent cost of living crisis is having on both households and businesses. And I think this debate this afternoon is very timely, set against that backdrop, because as right honourable members will be very well aware, our constituents, whether they be households or indeed businesses and community groups, are struggling under the weight of the increased fuel and energy costs in particular. Now, in perhaps anticipating some of the arguments and the comments of the Secretary of State when he was summing up and responding to the debate, I would like to acknowledge that there has been a package and measures of support from the UK government. And as the briefing informs us, it amounts to some 37 billion, includes £400 to help all households with energy bills, £650 for households receiving means-tested benefits, with an additional £300 for pensioners and £150 for people receiving disability payments, and then a further £150 council tax rebate for households in council tax band A to D.
Yes, the £400 to households, I'm very grateful for him giving way, and he's making an excellent speech. I wonder whether he would just share my concern that the residences of farmers count as businesses and they do not therefore qualify for the £400 household grant. And I think that for us in Wales would be a very significant, would make a difference to an awful lot of people in rural areas.
Well, I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for raising that important point. Indeed, I know it is something that a number of honourable members are concerned about, and I think there is still a lack of clarity arising from the technical consultation on the energy bills support scheme as to whether or not farms, which most of them, I'm told, will have a commercial energy contract, or electricity contract rather, but a dual contract which will also include their household premises, whether they will be able to receive this £400. And I think it is something that's important for the government to look at now before they introduce the scheme in the coming months. Because my right honourable friend is right, it wouldn't be appropriate and it wouldn't be fair if farmers, of which I know many of my colleagues here represent a great number, might lose out on this due to a technicality. Because I'm certain that it is an intention of the government to support these individuals and these households. It's just that the technical eligibility criteria need to be put right. So, of course, one of the things that the very useful House of Commons Library briefing told us, Madam Speaker, that despite that rather impressive package of measures, once we take into account changes to income tax and national insurance contributions, some of this support is offset, at least in terms of the net cost to the Treasury. And if we were to take into account these tax increases, the net level of government support stands at around £14 billion in the fiscal year 22-23. However, the point I'd like to make in this is that we need to consider whether or not this package of support is sufficient, given that we already know that domestic gas prices increased by 95% between May 2021 and May 2022, and the domestic electricity prices rose by 54%. In monetary terms, in nominal monetary terms, the April price cap has just been announced, so the increase to the average bill from the maximum, from £1,277 per year to £1,971. And we know that the chief executive of Ofgem mentioned just last month, in May rather, that he expected the price cap to raise by another 40% potentially in the autumn, to a maximum of £2,800. Now that is a doubling in less than 18 months, and so I think it's important that we do consider the sufficiency of the measures that have already been announced, because just after April's price cap, the Welsh Government estimated that some 45% of households in Wales could fall into real fuel poverty. And this is before, of course, taking into account any further increases that come in the autumn. Now, for rural MPs, or MPs representing rural areas, we will know that the energy price cap only offers solace to those who are what we call on-grid or mains gas grid households. For many off-grid properties, they have not been offered the same level of price protection and have been exposed to quite significant price increases in terms of heating oil and LPG. It's particularly true in Ceredigion, I'm sad to say, because according to the Mid Wales Energy Strategy, as many as 72% of properties in Ceredigion are off the mains gas grid. I'm sad to say that we have the accolade of being the constituency, the most dependent constituency on heating oil of any in the UK Parliament. And we know that heating oil on average has risen by some 150% in the last year, with some circumstances in which we see increases of significantly higher. So I think there is a debate that we need to have, perhaps not for today, but as to whether or not we need to change approach here in terms of how we tackle these price hikes. You know, are we certain that these are just one-off temporary increases? Some suggest that perhaps we've underestimated, costed the risk that actually some of these increases are here to stay, and indeed we could see further price increases. I know just today there are turbulence in Norway which might cause a further increase to the price of wholesale gas. There are a lot of uncertainties at a time when wholesale prices are already at an elevated level. I should also just mention, before drawing to a close, that I think there is more that we need to be doing in order to support small businesses and community groups with some of the energy and fuel price increases. You know, I've been speaking to many hospitality businesses in Ceredigion, for example, one of whom actually told me how their energy bills have increased by some 450%, to such an extent actually that they had to really consider whether they can continue operating or not. Now, I know that's not unique to them. I know a great number of many other businesses that are struggling in a similar manner, but it does strike me as though we can't allow otherwise viable and successful businesses fall foul of these price hikes, and I do sincerely believe that it does warrant further government intervention. And just to add to that, because I don't want to portray this as just an economic or solely economic problem, there is also a community or a social impact of the current crisis. We will all have heard from community groups, community halls, swimming pools, you name it, that are struggling at the moment with higher than average energy bills. We are currently in the summer months, so the usage is a lot lower than it will be in the winter. And so if they're struggling now, I dread to think we will be in the autumn. And just to raise another example from my own constituency, Calontysil, a community-run swimming pool in Llandysil, in the Teifi Valley, are already spending around £1,500 a week just to heat their swimming pool. And now that doesn't count the kind of dry side of their facilities. It is already forcing them to make very difficult decisions about provision of swimming lessons for our young people, which is, yes, one last intervention.
Giving way. And he's giving a typically thoughtful speech, as we've become accustomed to in the Welsh Affairs Committee, and I thank him for that. I'm grateful too that he mentions the levels of grants that are being given on an individual basis, but does he agree with me that in fact those can't ever be enough to make up, for example, inflation in house prices in our area, which drives some of the demographic change he referred to at the start of his speech. And that, in fact, the only way to see that remedied is with higher wages, more skilled jobs in Wales. And then does he share my frustration in the flatlining of the Welsh economy over the last 2 decades?
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention. I think I agree and I disagree. I agree in the sense that I would also very much like to see our economy develop to offer more of those high-wage career opportunities. What I would say, though, is that I think we need to disconnect the short, immediate term with the longer term. I agree with him that there are longer-term measures that would entail greater investment. In the short term, perhaps some of the measures, as well as direct kind of support, we need to look at initiatives such as a social tariff for utility bills, which is something that as chair of the APPG on fuel poverty, I'm very keen for us to see. And briefly, to conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, something that is plaguing a lot of families in rural areas are the cost of filling up the car. Sadly, Wales is a very car-dependent nation, with some 83% of commute dependent on private car use. And we would obviously want, in the long term, for public transport infrastructure to allow ourselves to wean ourselves from the car. But at the moment, we're sadly not in that situation. And it has both a social and an economic factor for rural areas like Ceredigion. Social in terms of provision of services, key essential services, in terms of district nurses and carers. They're telling me that they just cannot afford to travel the 400, 500, 600 miles a week they have to do in order to care for our elderly and in-need residents. I think there is a real case, and I'll end on this, I think there's a real case for us to reevaluate the rural fuel relief scheme to encompass more rural areas. It would make sense in terms of the immediate crisis and the need for it, but in the longer term we might be able to include it or incorporate it into levelling up objectives, whereby fuel duty perhaps is linked in some way, I admit it'll be complicated, to the levels of transport, or accessibility rather, to public transport infrastructure. That, I think, would be a very good way of moving forward to help rural areas proceed and endure this storm.
Yeah. Stephen Kinnett.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And it's a real pleasure to follow the Honourable Member for Ceredigion, and I'd like to congratulate the Honourable Member for